Hi, everybody. Let me share my screen, but welcome to number 2 of the Gender Voice series. This one is on resonance. I will be speaking like 1% of the time and Lily like 99% of the time, because this is one that is definitely her area of specialty. But if you have questions more about therapeutic application of the information, I can try to answer those for you as we get around to it. If you weren't here last week, my name is Nicole Gress. I'm a speech pathologist and a gender voice therapist and the founder of SF Speak. And then...
Hi, I'm Lily. I am a PhD student at Stanford, and I do research on phonetics of linguistic variation, and in particular, like gendered linguistic variation. And yeah, that's who I am.
Okay, Lily, did you mute yourself again? Cool. Just a brief overview why we're doing this, what we hope to achieve. This is the same slide as last time. Transparency, so removing the barriers between the research, or the researcher in this case, and those whom it most affects. So people who are looking to modify their voices. And also, a little bit of awareness around participation. So advocating for inclusivity of diverse voices in gender voice research, like Lily's. So we've done, this is our second one. We have one more next week. Like I said earlier, contrary to all of the crazy emails that went out this morning, they're all at the same time. They're all on Saturdays. And the next one is going to be next Saturday at 12 Pacific time. Today, we're going to talk about a quick resonance overview. WTF is a formant, vowel quality, gender informants, and the Q&A part. So last week when we talked about pitch, we used the power source filter theory model. And last week we talked about source, which was the fundamental frequency that was produced at the vocal folds as they vibrate. And now we're going to talk about what happens to that sound source as it moves through your specific or anybody's specific vocal tract and gets filtered before it enters the world. And that is resonance. And that is all I have to do today. I'm just kidding. This one is going to be a little bit different than last week in that it'll be more of a conversation. Lily and I purposely haven't ran through this at all with each other. Like, I don't know exactly what she's going to say or how she's going to say it or what she's going to be presenting purposefully, because we want it to be more representative of what it's like for us to actually be confused and have a conversation with each other and all of you. So, oops, you didn't see that yet. Now we're going to switch off between who is sharing what.
Yeah.
And I will pin you, Lily.
Okay, let me share my computer sound. Cool. So first thing, like we're talking about what resonance is, and I think the best way of thinking about that is to just like see how it looks in a way that like phoneticians usually see it. And so the way I describe this is like, think about, if you type in Switzerland into Google Maps, you get this like, just two-dimensional picture of what it looks like. And you could like put a picture of, these different peaks and kind of map them to where they are on the two-dimensional map. But another way of doing this is you just represent elevation using a color. So here you have a two-dimensional map at the same time, but from green to white, you have with red in the middle, you have elevation also represented. So in this way, you can have like a three-dimensional view of what Switzerland looks like. And this is a kind of a almost perfect parallel to what a spectrogram is. So here, what we have is a recording of speech. I don't know what this person's saying. I can tell you it's something unvoiced and then voiced, and I'll get into why I can say that. And by voicing, I just mean your vocal folds are vibrating. So here we have on the x-axis time, and on the y-axis we have the frequency in hertz. And the thing about there, you can see there's different darknesses. So this is the darknesses here represent like stronger amplitude, just louder sounds. And so it's kind of three-dimensional. You have like the time, you have the frequency, and then within that slice, each slice of time, how much energy there is at that point in the sound. And I can tell you, like, just looking at this, like this looks like a vowel to me, because what you see is this really dark band here at the bottom. That's actually the fundamental frequency. That's like what we were talking about last week when we were talking about pitch. And that phoneticians call that the voicing bar, because it just looks like a bar. And then what you have here these are dark bands as well. And, you know, the one kind of looks like right here, one kind of looks like it's right here, and then another kind of looks like it's like right here. And they get closer to each other as you go up. But these are what are called formants. And what a formant is basically, and you don't need to really understand the physics of this to understand what it is entirely, but because of the nature of like, I mean, think about like a flute, for example, or an oboe or a clarinet. Like what you have is like the vibration happening wherever, I mean, in different instruments, the vibration's happening in different places and in different manners, but like you have some kind of vibration and then a tube. And the tube creates what are called resonances. And the way that resonance works is that, okay, you have the fundamental frequency. That's just the pitch of the note. Say you're playing middle C on a flute. The weird thing about it, and this is hard for people to understand, it's hard for me to understand, it's like a kind of a galaxy brain kind of thing. Like above the fundamental, say you're speaking at 200 hertz, you have what are called harmonics. And those take place like at every multiple of the fundamental. So 200, 400, 600, 800. And what's weird about it is that it's kind of infinite. It's like an infinite stack of harmonics on top of one another. And so if here's like, my fingers are like the harmonics and here's the fundamental frequency, what's happening in any particular like tube of vibrating, column of vibrating air is it's creating what are called resonances, which are bringing the harmonics closer to each other. And so they kind of overlap and become stronger. And that's what a formant is basically.
Can you relate that to what happens, like, so take that idea of like the fundamental frequency being sent through a tube to our vocal tracts?
I mean, yeah, so our vocal tract is basically, I mean, it's weird to think about, but it is like a tube. And it's a really complicated tube. Like you have from your vocal folds to your lips, you could think about it as one tube, but like if we're looking like here, there's actually like there's a lot of tubes going on. There's a lot of tubes kind of connected. You have air coming. This is your velum back here. If your velum's open, you're gonna have air coming out of your nasal cavities. And what you're doing is to produce any kind of sound is just manipulating the dimensions of those tubes. And it's hard to think about as, it's not really a single tube. There's actually kind of like ways of thinking about it as multiple tubes, both connected and in series and in parallel. And yeah, I don't know, does that make sense?
Yes.
Well, so the question is, well, what is a formant? Well, like I said, it's a collection of amplified harmonics. And this is actually how we tell one vowel from another. So here, this is this I symbol, for example. This is just a spectrogram of someone saying the word, the vowel E, like in beat. Here you have the voicing bar down here and the formants. You can see like and we talk about them like, if the fundamental is F0, the 0th formant, then you have the first formant above it, the second formant, and the third formant. And you can see the first formant's pretty high when it comes to E.
Are you able to relate, or are you going to do this later, of like what the first formant maps onto biologically in your vocal?
Yeah. And you can see, well, yeah, I can say it right now, like in connection with like, so as you open your mouth, like E, is not super, but like like the first formant's going down in frequency. And so as you open your jaw, F1 is going, the first formant is going down and it's going to be, yeah. So, but it's also like, yeah, and I'll talk about what the second, third, fourth, because like I said, there are many formants, like because there are infinite number of harmonics, we like are able to perceive a good amount of formants, not infinite, obviously, but like they get weaker as you go up is the thing. You can see like above, closer to 5,000 hertz, there are formants here. They're just so weak you can't really even tell what they are, and they're actually hard to measure. And so, yeah, this is how we tell. Even at the same pitch, I can say e, ah, ah, and those are going to sound different. And this is what we call vowel quality. Like, it's how we distinguish vowels. Is basically on the basis of the first two formants.
There's a question. Do you want it?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, somebody said show the vowel space, but I know we're about to do that. Like you're about to have a bunch of slides on that. But don't show it yet.
Okay.
Somebody else asked, because formants are multiples of the fundamental, should they not be evenly spaced on the y-axis?
They are, the harmonics are like what is happening behind the scenes. What's happening, the filter is essentially changing the harmonics into like stronger collections. So like they're going to become obviously like the difference between 2000 hertz and 2200 hertz is also because we perceive sound like pitch frequency non-linearly. It's gonna it's gonna be like a bigger difference at the lower frequencies for sure. But the harmonics are behind the scenes. The resonances are what transform the harmonics into formants, or they're like collections of like bundled up harmonics, but they don't necessarily happen like at the same point that the harmonic happens.
So basically what you're saying here is like, though maybe your fundamental frequency is 200, the harmonics would be 400, 600, 800, etc. into infamy. Infinity, whatever.
Yeah.
That the reason that it's not represented equally spaced on here is because this isn't showing harmonics. This is showing formants.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is the collection of harmonics, and the darker lines are showing which collection of harmonics are highlighted based on the specific structure of the vocal tract at the time that it's being created.
Yeah, actually, if I knew I was going to get this question, I would have shown. So actually, I wasn't entirely specific about what this spectrogram is. It's called a wideband spectrogram. I don't exactly know. It's just some signal processing technicalities, but like there is such a thing as narrowband spectrograms, and you can actually see harmonics in that. So if people are interested in that, they should check out the narrowband spectrogram. Cool. And yeah, it does look evenly spaced when you look at the harmonics for sure.
On a narrowband.
Yeah.
Yeah, this isn't showing harmonics. This is showing collection of harmonics that are amplified by the specific structure of the vocal tract, which is represented here as a formant.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Totally, yeah. Any other questions? Oh, I think you're muted. Are you muted?
Sorry. Somebody said it's logarithmic, and then somebody else said the graph is logarithmic.
Oh.
No,
I think perception of pitch. Yeah, I mean, close to logarithmic, I guess. There's different ways of thinking about it. If you're interested in that, you should look up ERB or BARC or, yeah, but it's basically logarithmic. What's that?
What are ERB and BARC?
They're just different ways of thinking about our ability to perceive pitch, basically, frequency.
So when you said it's logarithmic, what you were saying is what we talked about last time with pitch, how like at the lower frequencies, the difference between 200 and 400 per se is more acoustically perceptual than the difference between like 2000 and 2200.
Certainly.
Okay, so that's what you were talking about with logarithmic.
Actually, yeah, so here I can describe that kind of at the same time. Oh, darn it, this doesn't show. Okay, so here, okay, well, I'll get there in a second.
Okay.
It's a really good question.
Keep
like, so this, if you were to plot just F1 from low to, going from basically at the origin, high to low, so inverse the axis, and then F2 from high to low, also inverted. Basically what you're gonna have is like, this is, if you draw a box around this, it's kind of like what your mouth looks like in a general sense. So like for E, we call it a high front vowel because high F2, low F1 means it's you produce it kind of in the front of your mouth. But by producing, what I mean is like what you're doing with your tongue is making a constriction in some part of this tube. And if the constriction is in the front of your mouth, we call it a front vowel. And if the constriction is happening close to your palate, that is like the hard part. It's not a complete closure, obviously, but it's a constriction. And if it's happening close to your palate, we call that a high vowel. Yeah. And so this is kind of what the vowel space looks like. And these are just IPA symbols for different vowels in English.
Can you say what some of them are? So maybe some people can try to,
yeah, it's good.
like
This
if
is
you make it E
yeah,
with
E
your
is up
mouth.
here. Yeah, E is right here. As down here, your mouth is pretty open. It's really open actually.
Your mouth is open, but your tongue is about mid position. It's not back or front.
Yeah.
And then if you get to the right
okay,
of the scale.
we shouldn't really get into this, but I'm a sociolinguist, and I'm not big into like dialectal variation, but there is like big differences in how people produce these vowels, for example, but we don't need to get into that. Interesting to think about in relation to voice feminization, but not super relevant to today's talk. So this is like, we call that, I mean, this is basically a schwa. It's like a mid vowel. We call it a mid vowel because it's kind of just right in the middle of the vowel space. Yeah. I mean, these back vowels like okay, I don't have this vowel really. If you're like from the East Coast, you might say the word, okay, I have to spell them out. CAUGHT and COT different.
Aw.
Yeah.
Aw. Like
Yeah, I don't have that, so I don't have that vowel at all, but
aw. Like you don't have it in the dialect geographically you're from.
yeah,
Aw.
generally the Wester you get, I'm from California, I'm from Los Angeles, and
Oh, I have it all over me.
yeah, they're like merged is what it's called. Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, this is the vowel space. You just plot. This will reappear again and again. You plot F1 against F2 inverted.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Okay, so basically, if I'm looking at this graph, like from my knowledge of like with the vowel quadrilateral, like you just said, the vowels that are towards the left are the ones that are produced with your tongue more front in the mouth, and then that varies on how high or low it is.
Yeah.
And then the middle is like the mid part of your mouth, and then the back is the further back in your mouth. So you have front, mid, and back for where your tongue actually is. And obviously then if it's back, it's more bunched, like it's more constricting the back space.
There's less room in the back, yeah.
Yeah, and then you have high, mid, and low, meaning how like up or down your tongue is in your mouth, which doesn't as much affect the constriction in the back. And then can you talk about F1 and F2? Like, can we say like F1 is this part of your bod, F2 is this part of your bod part of it?
Well, yeah, so like and this is like super simplistic, but we call these acoustic correlates of like certain articulatory behaviors. So like the higher the F1, the more open your jaw is basically.
So somebody said, does lowering the jaw impact R1? And that's the exact answer, but not R1, F1.
I mean, the relationship between, this is something people get caught up on, but the relationship between, I mean, phoneticians don't often talk about R1. They talk about like F1, because F1 is what we perceive. The R1 is really, again, it's like, okay, if I said harmonics are behind the scenes, the resonances are what are like in between the harmonics and the formants. And yes, they exist at a certain frequency, but what we're perceiving is formants.
So you don't talk about resonances. You talk about formants because that's what we're actually perceiving.
I don't think I've
talked about it at all. Okay, so lowering the jaw impacts F1, yes. When you say vowel quadrilateral, that is this graph. Vowel quadrilateral is, sure, I mean, it's not, they don't have it written on here, but like if you look at International Phonetic Alphabet or like as a speech pathologist, we're taught like, because we do articulation, right? So we help people fix like if they're misarticulating or like doing a vowel or a consonant sound wrong, we're taught like what is the manner, the place, and we won't get into all of that, of every vowel and consonant sound. And so there's a graph called the vowel quadrilateral that you can Google image search, and it'll basically be this, but with a little quadrilateral on top of it. And that quadrilateral kind of shows you more of like a mouth shape. So yeah, this is that graph, just taken the like the line, the quadrilateral shape out of it.
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about quadrilaterals, we're really simplifying things because people have wildly different vowel spaces in terms of F1 and F2. And like some of them look like quadrilaterals, some of them don't. They look like rectangles that are narrow. And it's just and this is a classic problem in like perceptual phonetics, is how we like come to perceive a vowel as a given vowel, like given that like people produce them so differently from one another. In fact, like every time I produce an E, it's not the same E. It's like a different E because I'm not putting my tongue and jaw in the same place every single time.
That's true for everybody.
Yeah, it's true for everybody.
You never, like, it's very rare that you hit the lightning twice. Here's a question. What
Yeah.
would you call the spectral peaks in voiceless vowel sounds then?
Yeah, those aren't formants, but they are like what did they say? Voiceless what?
What would you call the spectral peaks in voiceless vowel sounds then?
Voiceless vowel sounds? Oh, like, yeah, I mean, there's no, yeah. Okay. Yeah, those are, I guess, like some transparent getting at a resonance quality of resonance. But again, I don't know of a language that has voiceless vowels.
Somebody said I would still call them formants, question mark. But a formant is a representation.
And I actually have no idea because, like, yeah, as far as I know, maybe there's one, maybe, I don't know, Navajo has certain voiceless vowels or something, but I don't think that happens.
Are you saying you can't really answer the question because there's not really like.
I just don't know about it.
Kind of thing.
It's not really, people don't do it and when they're actually talking. Yeah.
Okay, somebody said, I think the question relates to a whispered vowel. So like a voiceless, like production, like put your mouth into the shape for the vowel and either put like an electrolarynx here to create sound or like sound into your mouth.
Yeah, there's no voicing, I guess. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't know if those are formants or not. There's something about the resonance.
Oh, if you want to clarify what you're kind of asking, it might be a little helpful.
I get what you're asking. It's just like I've never like come across it really.
You're saying that people don't produce them when they speak.
Well, I guess when they're whispering, but there is some amount of voicing when you're whispering as well.
Miria says Japanese has devoiced vowels.
I think I've heard of that. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
But standard American English, we don't have devoiced vowels.
No,
we don't. I mean, I know that we don't.
But yeah, I mean, whispering is a thing we do. I mean,
somebody said, would that be like the H and how before the O comes in? H is a voiceless sound. So,
yeah.
But
there are spectral properties you can talk about when it comes to fricatives, like H or F or V or, well, V is voiced, but like S, for example. Associate phoneticians love S. Like there is spectral properties of S, and we'll get into this maybe next week, like that are super like socially salient actually, like how front or back the tongue is in your mouth when you produce S has acoustic consequences that we can measure. And so, but that's not a formant. I mean, it is kind of a formant, but it's not the vowel type formant I'm talking about when we're talking about vowel quality.
Okay, somebody says, I'd love to hear more of your presentation. So we gonna get back on track.
So the complex thing is that like, not only does F1 and F2 vary depending on where you're making the constriction with your tongue and jaw, but it depends also on your vocal tract length. So like a shorter vocal tract is on the whole going to have higher formant frequencies. It's just the way that resonance works. The thing about that, and so, yeah, and because of like the testosterone-based puberty, like your vocal tract undergoing that like is on average a few centimeters longer. So you're gonna have overall like lower formant frequencies. The interesting thing though is that if the only differences between, on the whole, on average, like men and women who have undergone testosterone puberty or those who haven't, is that like we would expect a uniform difference in the formant frequencies. And so here's a plot, for example, of average. You just take a bunch of, these are cis men and women, obviously, and you take a bunch of them and you have them read a passage or produce vowels in isolation, and then you just take measurements and get at like what the average, like the mean value for F1 and F2 for each vowel is. So this is E, this is A, this is A. I don't have this vowel really, but yeah, there we go.
I'll split it.
All the way up to U.
Can you say one more time what you were saying just now about like we would expect them to have equidistance if
Yeah.
like, say that again.
So this solid line is the like cis women and the dotted line is the cis men. And you can see like their ooh, for example, for sure the cis women's ooh has a higher F1, is lower in the graph. And it's more left on the graph. It has a higher F2.
Is this mapped onto like the vowel quadrilateral? Right? Like the other one we looked at, is this basically like to the left is more front, to the
Same
top?
exact thing. It's the same
Same
exact
exact thing.
thing.
Okay.
And okay, if the only difference was in terms of vocal tract length, what you'd expect is like, here's ooh, oh, ah, they're kind of somewhat like have a similar relationship in that they're kind of like, I don't know, on my screen, they're like a centimeter lower and like half a centimeter more low or left. But then you look at the front vowels and it's like, whoa, like what's happening here? The front vowels in cis women are so much more front than the, sorry, there's a lot of comparatives in this sentence, but like the difference between E's between cis and men and women is like greater than the difference between the oohs, for example, these back vowels.
So what you're saying is if it was only vocal tract length that was happening in our perception of gender voice, then we would expect the difference between the cisgendered male and cisgendered female, each vowel to be equidistant. There wouldn't be like a larger gap between the E than the ooh.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Okay.
Oh, and I wanted to, this is one point I want to talk about, like when people are talking about like, well, should I get into this now? Like F1, people talk about F1 as like a big gender thing, right? I think that I'm not big in this like world, but like people do talk about F1 as like a big determinant of gender, which I don't completely understand actually. I think it's much more complicated than that, as we'll see. But like, if F1 here goes from 200 to 1,000 on this graph, you're gonna have, and again, this is men's and cis men's and women's vowel classes plotted by F1 and F2. Like cis men have this ah right here, right, which is at like close to 800 hertz in terms of F1, and I don't know, cis women have this ooh, which is like maybe 450 hertz. So if I don't get this like sold, I think the picture is much more complicated. It's like all the formants working together, as we'll see.
So someone asked, like, how much impact do F3 to F5 have on perceived vocal gender?
Oh, no one knows, but we'll talk about that.
You'll talk about that. Yeah. Okay.
I think, okay, yeah, I'll say my opinion.
Okay, you'll save your opinion. Somebody else said, it does look like on a logarithmic scale, this would look more even. Okay, let me just scroll up for a second. So about the whole like voiceless vowels and the formant correlation in them, that individual who asked said, I'm kind of unclear myself because with voiceless vowels, there's no discrete harmonic glottal source.
Yeah, exactly.
It's more like a continuous band of frequencies. So in that case, formants and resonances would be the same. Like, does what is read out on the spectrogram as a formant directly correlate then to a resonance in that case, if there's no glottal harmonic?
You're not going to be able to measure really. I mean, I don't know if you're going to measure formants when there's no voicing happening, because, I mean, if you look at like a freaking unvoiced, like the S, for example, it just looks like a bunch of noise. There's no structure.
But they're putting like sound in their mouth with like white noise or something. So there is like a frequency, if you will.
Yeah,
anyway,
you're just doing the glottal source for some external sound. Why not just voice? I don't get that.
Somebody else answered, I found a link that uses the term formants to talk about a voiceless consonant S.
Yeah, yeah. I would maybe question whether that's a formant, but it is interesting to think about. Like, I mean, I'm more familiar talking about spectral moments of fricatives, not necessarily formants.
And then O'Leary says, it does look like on a logarithmic scale, this would look more even. A linear scale doesn't correspond well to perception of pitch.
No, yeah, I mean, as you can see, like F2 ranges from like, I mean, the plots are just in completely different scales, right? Here's 500, here's 3,000, here's 200, here's 1,000. I mean, and this is totally because of our perception of pitch. Like a tiny difference in F1 is going to relate to a different vowel quality. but you have to have a bigger jump in terms of F2 at the higher ranges for there to be a perceptual difference.
And remind us, F1 is what structure and F2 is what structure?
F1 is inversely correlated with the height of the vowel, and F2 is correlated.
I mean physical structure.
Sorry? Oh, sorry, height of the jaw is what I meant.
Which is F1 or F2?
F1, inversely correlated with F1.
And F2 is front or backness of the tongue in the mouth.
Directly correlated, yeah.
Got it. I mean, knew it, just clarifying.
Yeah, totally. So what accounts for this non-uniform difference then, like in vowel quality? And that's no one knows. But it could be behavioral. It could be a lot of different things. But it turns out that, yeah, like, and this is, no one really properly understands vowel space, and we can talk about vowel space maybe in a Q&A. It's very interesting, but yeah. Okay, so let's talk about some of my research about this. And the way I'd like to get at that is by, first, I think the picture is complicated. That's what this slide is for. And I didn't know exactly where to put it, but I think you'll get a sense of how complicated it is by looking at the actual data.
Before we kind of get into it, because this is where it gets interesting, right? Because you're actually using like trans feminine voices and showing your research on them in relation to resonance. Is everybody clear on what's happened so far? Like if you are like, what the hell is happening? Please speak up because it's helpful to hear. Or if you're like, we're good, let's just keep going, you can also do that as well. I'm giving a lot of power to you. Okay, someone says move on. Cool.
Okay, so
we'll do it.
I did a study. So because it's one thing to say like, here's what trans women should do. It's another thing to be like, what are they doing, right? I mean, I think that's an interesting thing. So like, I recruited via so many things. I learned about Mastodon. It's kind of like Twitter for like, I get the sense it's like, I mean, I'm on there. It's like a geeks, I guess, cool geeks. But I recruit a lot of trans women from Mastodon, more so than Twitter. And 19 of them who self-identify as having feminized their voice. And then they just read the rainbow passage and they're like, what I'm calling their higher and lower registers, which is just like, you could think about it as like, they're feminized. I mean, I don't like talking about it as like a voice because I don't know if we have multiple voices. I think that's like an ideological question, basically not an empirical question, but yeah. Does that make sense? Yeah, okay. And then and I guess the question marks are just like what's going on. So that's the acoustic study. So first I want to talk about F1. So here's F1, and then by speaker there's 19 of them, and then F1 is on the y-axis, and then they're just separated by who they are. And the blue, confusingly, is the higher register, and the coral is the lower register. So I'm actually gonna play. If you weren't here last time, what we did was like listen to it, look and kind of relate what we're hearing back to the graph because I think it's interesting. And the reason it's kind of, I didn't look at form and stuff before I chose I mainly looked at pitch last time when I was presenting them. So that was interesting. But it kind of carries forth. No matter who I pick, it's interesting. Like here's speaker number 6. I'll play their recordings. I think tell me if you can hear this.
Okay. I'll tell you.
When the sunlight strikes raindrops in the air, they act as a prism and form a rainbow. The rainbow is a division of white light into many beautiful colors.
So that's the lower register, and this is the higher register.
When the sunlight strikes raindrops in the air, they act as a prism and form a rainbow. The rainbow is a division of white light into many beautiful colors.
Yeah. So what's interesting about her, I mean, I love her voice. It's so pleasant. She's 61 years old, for those who weren't here last time. She actually has the lowest median F1 in both higher and lower registers. This is why I'm like, I don't know if F1 is like the thing to think about. Yeah, I mean, to me, her voice never sounded masculine to me. I don't know, but it's not that I'm the best judge of that, but like, I think that's interesting to think about. Like, this is just F1. What are you supposed to garner from this? Like, in some ways, this is kind of a futile exercise. So I'll play speaker 10 now, and you can see she's kind of like middle of the road, and then becomes the highest median F1 frequency.
When the sunlight strikes raindrops in the air, they act as a prism and form a rainbow. The rainbow is a division of white light into many beautiful colors.
When the sunlight strikes raindrops in the air, they act as a prism and form a rainbow. The rainbow is a division of white light into many beautiful colors.
Yeah.
Somebody asked, is this plot stats for all vowels across the whole passage? Like, what are you taking the measurements on specifically in the passage?
Yeah, they're all vowels. Yeah. It turned. Oh, okay. Here, I'll look at the. Well, let's play number 13, and I'll show you the results of the mixed effects model that shows like what the effect of, because I did include the vowel class as a predictor in the model, and anyway, but yes, it's all vowels in the passage. I don't know if there's a follow-up question to that. Maybe there will be, but I'll play number 13 too. So she starts. I mean, again, like, I don't know what to say about this. Honestly, I think this is why I was like, I don't know if we should prepare notes, because what am I going to say about this? Like, it doesn't seem to map on to like what I hear when I hear someone's voice. So let's listen to number 13.
Somebody asked, silly question, but what are the dots on this type of graph? So the dots.
Outliers.
Outliers, okay.
Yeah. So they could be measurement errors. In some cases they probably are. Yeah.
Someone else asks, how are we applying this, the F1 information we're hearing, or like the F1 to achieve feminine preserved voice? What is the goal? Perceived, maybe?
Oh.
So they're trying to say?
Yeah. I mean, my whole point is that like you can't. Like, I don't think you can. Like, in absolute terms, like there's kind of no relationship between like F1 in particular and how feminine a voice sounds. I mean, that's not my experience. I think it's way more complicated than that. Yeah. Should we hear number 13 and I can move on kind of more rapidly?
Yes.
She's British. I like her voices too.
Sunlight strikes raindrops in the air, they act as a prism and form a rainbow. The rainbow is a division of white light into many beautiful colors.
When the sunlight strikes raindrops in the air, they act as a prism and form a rainbow. The rainbow is a division of white light into many beautiful colors.
Yeah. Again, what are you supposed to garner from the fact that she has a kind of, in terms of the rest of the speakers, like kind of a low median F1 frequency in her lower register, and not too much of a big difference. So yeah, you could, I mean, one approach is you could, I'm not a practicing clinician, but like you could, but I don't have strong recommendations, because like you could produce in your, like, say you're beginning to feminize your voice, like you could read the passage and then measure your F1 in the, in your pre-process voice feminization process way of talking, and then in your something you're practicing. And yeah, sure. I mean, overall, people are doing this. Like F1 is raising. Like
there's a question here. They said I would be. Let me just read it here. It does seem like all of them have higher F1s in the high register though, right? Except like S14. And then Krista said, I'd be interested in hearing examples where the F1 frequency median is actually higher for the lower register voice, like 4 or 14.
Yeah, I just have to double check that 4 and 14 like consented, and I didn't, to having their recordings played, and I didn't check that ahead of time. But
okay, we can move on then if you want, and we can do that if you check a little later.
No, but it is true. It is true. Like I mean, this is okay. This is the output for a mixed effects model in which I inputted the vowel class, and this is what this Wells they're called Wells classes. So like goose, for example, is oo, fleece, for example, is e, and then the register difference. So like going from lower to higher, for example, the model estimates a 58 hertz jump. It's pretty interesting. I mean, 58 hertz, especially in terms of F1, because of how low the frequencies are, we're talking about F1. I mean, overall, the estimate for the just overall F1 value for every vowel class is, and yeah, it's like, it's, well, we can talk about the mean values later, but like, yeah, they're higher. I mean, certainly people are doing it. Yeah, I don't know if, I mean, this is just the mixed effects model. I did the boilerplate last time talking about like the how the effects were entered, the fixed and random effects, but people are doing F1 for sure. Like, it's something to think about, but like, is it the end all be all? Certainly not. I don't necessarily can be. Yeah.
Do you have a software recommendation?
Oh, for measuring formants?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, Prot.
Prot, yeah. Prot's free. It's
That's
a little
free.
bit of a learning curve, but there's a lot of like free YouTube videos on how to use Prot. It's Praat.
Yeah.
I use VoicePrint, but it's $75. But it's really interesting. It's like really, it's a really, really interesting piece of software. But it's definitely like there's definitely a financial barrier to that one.
I mean, Prot, again, like, I don't know what you're going to get out of measuring formants, but it is interesting. And maybe we could do a tutorial on that. I think that'd be interesting.
On what, how to use
Yeah, Prot to measure formants. Yeah.
Yeah, it kind of goes to the question of like, should you use them? And
Yeah, I don't know if you should, but it's interesting.
I think that answer is more of like, how do you learn?
Yeah.
And are you able to do that and then generalize it to your speaking voice? Because yeah, I mean, there's a whole bunch of extra questions there. Somebody asked.
Yeah.
Oh, never mind. They're just talking in the chat about different software for measuring. We can move on.
Yeah. Prot is what I use. So, and I automate. I didn't do this by hand, obviously. There's like over 2,000 vowels in all the passages together, even if you filter out like phonetic context in which it's harder. The other thing is you have to know which phonetic context is easier to actually measure reliably the formants, because there's certain, I think there was like 58 words in the passage that were suitable. And so yeah, 58 times whatever, there's a lot. Anyway, this is F2 in Hertz. So speaker 6 is here again. I'll go back to that. And then again, there's not much difference at all, even in terms of the variance, like the size of the boxes, where the median is, not that much difference. Like, yeah, certainly not.
So this would be one of those cases where like the F1 and the F2 don't change much from the low to the higher register, but the perceived femininity of the voice does.
Certainly, right? I think so. Maybe I'm not the best judge, but I think it did. Here's 10. There's a difference. I don't know what to make of that. I don't know what to make of it. Here's 13. Anyway, I'll go back to the model. Okay, what's interesting is that like, so here's the mixed effects model for F2. Its estimate for the effect, the size of the effect of register difference, that is going from lower to higher register, is 93 Hertz. Bigger than the effect for F1, but again, we perceive frequency non-linearly. Maybe that's kind of equivalent, who knows? I don't know.
I was kind of distracted whenever you looked at this type of the readout for F1. What exactly are you highlighting with this table?
Oh yeah, can you see my cursor?
Yes.
The most important thing I think is just this estimate here, and then how significant the effect is over here. So a lower number.
Estimate of what?
Of the effect that, like, I'm not a stats wizard, but like, you say you go from lower to higher register. You have a bunch of measurements for vowels for lower register and for every 19 of the speakers, and then you have a bunch for the higher register. Okay, by speaker, by vowel, if you're going from the higher to the lower register, how much can we expect? How much can we expect there to be a difference in terms of Hertz? And so that is here, 93 Hertz.
Somebody said, I feel like the through point I'm learning is that voice gender is confusing. Yeah. And then Shiva said, I'm a little confused. Most of the things we're covering, we're saying don't have a big impact on vocal feminization. So what does?
Okay, I will talk about that. I don't want you to get the impression that I'm not going to talk about that. Yeah.
Okay.
I just don't think there's an end all be all, but there is, like, I think things that are more reliable that people don't often think about. If you're going to measure anything, and then I'll say, like, I give my whole spiel for like what we should be doing, because that's really important.
All right, let's do it. We have 10 minutes to make it at an hour. We'll end up going longer.
Okay, here's F3. Generally, there's just less variation in F3. Here's speaker number 6.
Is F3 lips? What's F3?
Oh, I didn't talk about F3. F3 is somewhat correlated with how round your lips are. So like, for example, if you move from a vowel like E, the beat vowel in English, fleece, and then you just, all you do is round your lips, you get a vowel that is not in English, but in German, for example. So you go E. The second one almost sounds like goose to me, that vowel in goose, but it's not, it's a different vowel. And if you look at F3, the F3 is gonna be like lower for between the E and U vowel. U vowel.
So if we just super basic generalize that F3 is usually correlated to how spread or rounded your lips are.
Yeah, so what's interesting about this is that there is an effect, the big effect of F3, like a register difference when it comes to F3, 144 hertz. What we can say, this is the first thing we can say pretty clearly, articulatorily, what people are doing and to feminize their voice. And it turns out like they are generally retracting their lips, which is shortening the length of the vocal tract. So yeah, that's going to show up in F3, but it's also going to show up in F4.
Dun, dun, dun.
Here's F4. Here's speaker number 6. Again, hard to say, but here's speaker number 10. Again, a difference, and then 13, actually a pretty big difference. But again, she's, even her feminized register, like, it's not higher than other people's necessarily. Yeah, but I think, yeah, there's still a big difference now. I perceive the voices.
Eliza says rounder lips equals higher F3, direct correlation?
No, not direct correlation, only for some vowels and in certain contexts. I'm not entirely sure. It's like not as direct a correlate as F1 and F2 are for like height and frontness, but somewhat correlates, I guess. And again, it's hard, okay. Shorter vocal tract means higher formants, right? But like, so rounding your lips, like when you're doing ooh, you're definitely gonna have a lower F3. So it's actually the other way around than the question phrased it. Yeah, you're lengthening your vocal tract by rounding your lips. That's what's happening. Oh, and I forgot to mention this. Okay. This is kind of crucial information actually. Like pre-puberty, right? Like, you know, children, we consider boys and girls, like their vocal anatomy is not different. Different, about the same size, like it's all, you know, comes out in the wash. But the thing is, you play like speech of like even 4-year-olds talking, and people can reliably say whether they're boys or girls. So what's going on? It's just behavior. That's all that's happening. That's distinguishing them. And people basically think that like boys are either rounding their lips more or yeah, lowering their larynx, which is going to increase the.
What is F4? You're going to, like, what is F4? And then, yeah.
F4 is not correlated with anything, with any articulatory behavior that we generally think of in those terms. That is like articulatory behavior, because.
You mean like a structure? It's not correlated with a specific structure.
What's correlated, it actually is, as you get higher in this formant stack, the formants become more reliable indicators of the overall size of the vocal tract.
So F4 is the most reliable measure of the length of the vocal tract.
That we know of. It's a messy science, like, but using repeated measurements of F4 and like using a multiple linear regression model, you can pretty reliably, and then compare it. Okay, the study was done in 2015, for example. You have people produce vowels, you measure the F4 in the vowels, and then you have an MRI of them talking. And then you actually, like using digital tools, measure the space from the opening of their lips to their glottis and their larynx. And it turns out you're pretty good at estimating the size of the vocal tract using just F4.
Someone else says, can I suggest that because this data set includes all vowels, the large air boxes make the mean formant shifts look small graphically, but the shift per vowel may still be quite perceptible? The perceptible threshold is surely a critical point.
Yeah, and I think that's a psychoacoustic question that I don't have an easy answer for. But I don't get what this larger air box has to do. What is the question? Can you read the question again?
Can I suggest that because this data set includes all vowels, that the large air boxes I don't know what the air box. Yeah, I don't know what they mean by air box. Do they just mean the violin box? O'Leary, can you, yeah, I imagine that's what they mean.
Just the height of the
Yeah,
open.
they asked if they can speak. For sure. Let's just unmute you. Hold on a moment. Trace, could you do that? Is that something that you can do?
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Excellent. No, it was just since all of the vowels are kind of smushed together on the one plot, so each speaker has got all their vowels together.
Yeah.
So what I'm seeing from the graphs is that you've got kind of a mean, which is the middle of the box, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think what you're noting is that there's a relatively small difference in the graph between the mean on the lower register voice and the higher register voice. Is that my correct assessment of what you're saying?
For the voices that we looked at, yeah. Generally, yeah.
And so
Yeah.
what I'm suggesting is that because the boxes are quite large, because there are large numbers of vowels included in the data set, that's possibly a function of how the plot is made and the large axes on the y-axis, rather than the difference is not perceptible. So it's more because the boxes are large and the axes are correspondingly large that the difference looks small, rather than the difference isn't perceptible or meaningful.
Yeah, I mean, so here's the model. I included vowel class as a fixed effect. And I don't know if you remember, but when we were looking at the F1 and F2 and to a certain degree F3, like the vowel type is like, these were all pretty significant. I mean, I think for F1, F2, every single vowel level, different class, like was a significant effect, meaning that it was different from the reference level, which I guess is the first vowel class to come alphabetically, which is dress, the bet vowel. When it comes to F4, the picture is less clear because, again, it's less sensitive to the kind of constriction you're making with your mouth. And so only for a couple vowels does the model estimate an effect on F4. But we could certainly, I don't know if you have any ideas of like what vowels to look at, but yeah, I don't know. It turns out kit, for example, on average is just higher. In terms of F4, but that's between.
Oh, sorry, I didn't realize I'd been unmuted. I'm very sorry. Yeah, I was busy typing an answer. I have a few suggestions, but I suspect it probably is going to make the talk go on quite long if I go on for this about too long. I was just suggesting that the factor is that it's about how significant it's perceived rather than the statistical significance, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
and I think there's only limited value to be looked at the statistical significance rather than the perceptual significance of a change, if that makes sense.
Well, I don't fully understand. Like, so the estimate of the effect for F4, for example, is 171 hertz. Again, that doesn't show up super well even on this graph because like, there's like between these lines, I'm pointing into my screen, not using my cursor. There's a 500 hertz difference here, right? The effect it estimates is 171 hertz for a register difference. I think that, I mean, I have a hunch that's perceptible. I'm not certain.
For me, who is like, what the hell are you talking about in this conversation? Can we do this part at the end if there's like, if you both want to stay on a little bit? Because I am just personally lost. But so really fast, O says it's also very observable that the spans of F1 and F2 across all vowels is much larger than the average differences per vocal sex.
True. I mean, that's going to be true, yeah.
And then Jillian asks, technical is great when I want to learn technical stuff, and I usually do, but for today, how do we change the resonance of our voice to sound more feminine? Isn't that supposed to be the topic, or did I misunderstand?
Yeah, I think we'll get to that.
Okay.
So there was a study done in 2012 where they asked a group of people, cis women and men, to read a passage, a variety of things, like in the most feminine way, the most neutral way, the most neutral way, and then the most masculine way they could. And they took measurements of the fundamental frequency as well as the first through fourth formant. So I'll just provide the results because I think it's interesting to look at. And in fact, I'll just focus on the like cis men's results, what they're calling male. Okay, so like in the, let's just focus on the neutral and feminine conditions. So like here's F1 over here, and we go over here. Okay, mean, that's just the mean value, the average value for F1, 527 hertz. And again, it goes down, it goes up in the when they're doing feminine voice. And you can see, it's not really important to note. You can go back and forth if you have questions, but like, and then you can, it kind of raises the question, well, what are trans women doing? Like, how does this compare? And here are the values. So on the left here is the values for the lower register, and on the right is the values for the higher register. And yeah, again, like even if we're thinking about F4, like as a more robust indicator of vocal tract length, which perhaps we're using in, someone asked a question about like higher formants, F3 through, I don't remember if they said 5 or whatever. We're certainly using higher formants. In fact, we're using higher formants when we identify a voice, like, oh, that voice belongs to Lily, not just that voice belongs to a woman or whatever. That's an aside, but in any case, if we're looking at F4 in the higher register here on the right, and compare that with the feminine voice, it's higher. Whether that's like something you're interested in and like can use, I don't know. And so maybe Nicole, you can talk about to answer the question, like, how would you approach working with someone on resonance, like when they're trying to feminize their voice?
It's a loaded question. Let me mute you. Yeah, I mean, my talks with Lily are like super, like everybody's saying now, like what's happening. We're talking a lot about research, and just to be clear, like this talk was for the research, right? And it's hard because Lily as a researcher talks about the research part. And so I think everybody's kind of seeking like, okay, what's the interpretation of this information and how is it applicable clinically to my practice for like voice feminization? And there's a lot of layers to that. There's people who learn, like definitely with resonance, if you're trying to feminize a voice, we affect change to shorten a vocal tract. If you're trying to masculinize or just move from where you are lower, we try to affect change by lengthening the vocal tract. I sometimes say your vocal tract is like a slinky, right? So it's a slinky and there's 2 ends to it. So you can elongate that vocal tract by focusing on your lips. You can elongate the vocal tract by focusing on your larynx. You can focus on both of them. Like there's different combinations of those things. But then there's also this huge meaty bit in the middle, which is your tongue, that's going to affect the resonance as well. So whenever we're trying to affect change by working on resonance for gender voice, it's a lot of like exploration of which of those approaches works best for each individual. Because some people, I don't know so much if Lily explicitly talked about this yet, but like you can't just raise larynx to one carriage, keep it there, and then like isolate it there, hold it there, and then be able to create all the different vowels, because some of them like have a lower larynx height, some of them have a higher larynx height. So that needs to be a structure that can freely move. At least you can take the whole thing up and then allow it to move freely, just at a higher register or a higher placement, if you will. Some people learn that way. Some people can open a spectrogram, they can start manipulating, trying to isolate just their larynx height when they're like isolate just the movement of their larynx height, which is doable for some people. But there's a whole other group of people who don't have that type of isolated control. And that doesn't mean that they have to learn how to isolate only the movement of their larynx, devoid of pitch, devoid of area epiglottic sphincter, devoid of jaw, lips, the whole thing. Like it doesn't mean you have to learn how to isolate individually every different structure of your vocal tract in order to achieve a feminine or masculine, or whichever direction you're trying to go into voice. There's some things are connected. So if you put your hand on your larynx and you swallow, your larynx is usually then at the mid position, right? So that after swallow, no voicing, just hand on your larynx, after swallow, that's your mid position of your larynx. Then if you yawn, that's the lowest your larynx can go. And then if you swallow at the top of your swallow, when it's as high as it goes, that's the highest that your specific larynx can go. That's unvoiced, but there's a restriction on how, like, not everybody can get as, you can't get as high as your swallow when you're actually speaking. If you're trying to feminize and raise your larynx, you can't get as high as that, or else you're completely closing your airway. So the trick here is to figure out, like, so if you do a swallow, I'm just kind of doing therapy now. If you do a swallow, put your hand on your throat and feel where it's at rest, and then start speaking. What happens? For most people, your larynx doesn't stay at the mid position. It either lowers or higher. And like, that's something you have to figure out first before you figure out how am I going to affect change with my resonance, right? If you keep your hand there and then you go up or down in pitch, like, does your larynx move? Great. If your larynx, when you do a pitch glide up, goes up, then whenever it would maybe check out, maybe Lily won't like me saying this, but that if you if you raise your pitch a bit, your larynx is going to be higher as well. So there's certain people who have adhesions to like pitch and larynx height, or jaw open, closed, front, back, mid. That's something we don't even talk about, or we haven't talked about yet, like where if your jaw is forward, in the middle, or back. Like these things can be attached to other structures. So if you want to affect change in resonance, hold on, I'm not going to read because I'm getting distracted. You can do it at the bottom of the slinky, at the top of the slinky. You can do some mix of the two. You can focus on the tongue. Like there's different ways into resonance manipulation, and the whole journey of voice feminization, masculinization, just voice modification, gender wise, is figuring out which of those ways is most approachable for you. Like which of those, because they're all going to brighten or darken. Like there's aspects of each of those, right? So like a spread lip is going to brighten, a round lip is going to darken, a low larynx is going to darken, a high larynx is going to brighten. Like a forward high tongue is going to brighten, a back down one is going to darken. So that's really what you're kind of looking at there. It's just exploring which of those avenues is easiest for you. Like, are you somebody who wants to learn how to individually isolate the movements of their larynx, isolated from their tongue, isolated from their jaw, isolated from their lips? If that works for you and that's something that's approachable for you, then do it. And then you'll have like super mastery over your voice. I've just found anecdotally that that's not necessarily how everyone learns. And that doesn't mean that that's the only way to do it. Like this is me on a soapbox about different approaches, if you will. But I think there is no direct answer to like, you have to only raise your larynx, or you have to do your larynx and your lips. Like the voice instructor that I study with says the easiest things to focus on are actually the front, the top and bottom of the slinky, not the tongue, because the tongue is like so ingrained in how we do things. But I don't know if that answered the question a little bit or confused you more, right? But let me say what the question is here. So we agree that raising the larynx feminizes voice. What difference can we actually measure if not F1?
Raising your larynx for certain kinds of, we don't fully have a good understanding, but it probably raises F2, and it, I mean, all else being equal, raises F4 as well. Because F4 is a robust indicator of the vocal tract length, like to some degree. But yeah, I don't know if it's helpful in people's practice. And so maybe I can talk a little bit about, well, maybe we'll get to like what the approach should be, I think, for like some kind of software approach to feminizing your voice, certainly. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, we can move on through the actual presentation.
Do you want to talk about your?
Oh yeah, go back. Get out of there, go back. I was reached out to, so I figured I would just do it now because I had a lot of people from the last talk reach out to me and ask about like what it would be like to work together. And I am doing like a June intensive, which is basically all the basics for like what you need to know foundationally for gender voice work that get you to the point past the learning curve to where you can start individually working on how to like make a bespoke voice, if you will. And it's starting in June. It's for, there's a, can you go to the next slide? Starts on June 1st, $250. It's, if you want to learn more about it, go to sfspeak.com/group class. And there's like a 6-minute video of me telling you all what it is, why I did it, how it works, what the framework is, the whole bit of it. Just thought I would put it in here so that it's more easily accessible.
Cool. And I can talk about, let me pin myself. So there's a lot we don't know about voice feminization. Like we don't really know how formants relate to other formants. We don't really know how that relationship affects someone's perceived voice gender. We don't know what actually changes over the course of voice feminization. And so way I'm thinking about approaching this is like, you have a lot of recordings of trans women or trans feminine people in general, like feminizing their voices. And then you have like another group of people evaluate those recordings on what dimensions, unclear, like, but say you could get reliable evaluations for those how feminine the voice sounds, for example. Then you could train some sort of like machine learning, artificial intelligence, basically, to output predicted values for recordings the network hasn't seen before. And this could be a really useful tool because it's incorporating the raw audio, not formant measurements, not pitch information, just the audio, the entire audio in its entirety, in its gestalt kind of sense. And so instead of just tracking the frequency or pitch of your voice, which is oftentimes what these software tools do. I mean, as far as I know, there's not many that are involving formant measurements because it's kind of, you have to know where the vowel is happening, for example, to do a formant measurement. That you could get a reliable way of, like, without having to ask someone, how would you gender my voice? It would just kind of tell you. And it would be tailored to the specifics of trans women's voices. Yeah, because there are binary gender voice gender classifiers, but I don't think they work very well for a number of reasons, and I don't think they're very applicable to, yeah, not cis people who are. I mean, it depends on the training data, obviously, but yeah. So that's one way of approaching this, and so I have a website. There's a variety of URLs. I haven't figured out which is the best one, but you can go to voicefeminizationstudy.com and reach out to me. And basically what it involves is just reading a passage once a week or more or less. It's up to you and what you think is going to be most beneficial to your practice in terms of like just motivating you. And you could get a nice like kind of diary. You can make some kind of timeline, or those are always cool. And yeah. People asked a lot of questions about this last time. We can get into specifics and, you know, maybe in the future, but that's basically how the gist of it. So yeah.
Yeah, let me mute you, pin myself, all these movements. There's like a lot of really good discussion happening in the chat box. So why don't we, if this is what you came for and you got what you came for, wonderful.
Would it be possible to go back over again the kind of physical places in the vocal tract that F1, 2, and 3 sit and reside?
Sure, yeah. F1 is correlated with, inversely correlated with how low your jaw is. So like higher F1 means more closed mouth, I guess. And lower F1 means more open jaw. So like E versus ah or ah maybe is better because it's almost as front as E. And F2 corresponds with like how front the constriction is. That is like the place you're putting your tongue to make the vowel, how front that is in your mouth. And there was a question like about
and then F3 is loosely correlated to the lips.
Loosely correlated, yeah.
And then F4 is an overall measurement of vocal tract, but there's no physical F4.
Yeah, and again, we rely on higher formants perhaps to identify any given person rather than like any social characteristics of their voice.
How much does like sinus capacity factor into this in your vocal tract length?
So F3 also, oh, am I unmuted? Oh, F3 is somewhat related to nasality as well, how much air is moving through your nasal cavity, but again, I don't know what the relevance is for voice feminization necessarily. But that is ill understood, and again, it's more loosely correlated. But, so yeah.
I think this is kind of a basic question, but I was kind of wondering, what do you mean when you say the vocal tract? And what is the vocal tract length like something that's just like part of your body, or is it also influenced by how you use it? Yeah.
No, that's a pretty pressing question actually, because like, okay, vocal tract as I understand it, and as many people understand it, is just the structures that are intervening between where your vocal folds are to your lips. and you can measure the length of it. It's like anywhere from, in adults, like, I don't know, this is plants off the top of my head, but like 14 millimeters to 19 millimeters, and depending on the person. So that's the vocal tract, and it has a length. And can you measure that length reliably? And like, it's the same for every, like, there are different perspectives on vocal tract length. There's the static perspective, which is that like, there's just one measurable vocal tract length for any given person. The dynamic perspective says like, well, you know, sound to sound, there's going to be micro variations in how long the vocal tract is. So it's not something we can measure statically. My perspective is a little different than that, even in that like people, I mean, in order to feminize their voice, essentially what you're doing is shortening your vocal tract, like for everything you do, not just sound to sound, but like holistically, systematically. 14 millimeters, oh, centimeters is what I meant, yes, sure, certainly. So yes, it can be measured, but there's been no, not again, I didn't say this yet, but there's been no real-time MRI, you know, measurements of, you know, transcending speech. There should be, but yeah.
Anybody have anything else they'd like to ask? You can unmute and ask, or ask in the chat.
So I've got a question about resonance. And so what I was taught is to move the voice into the mouth and out of the chest. And I've moved it out of the chest, but it's still very stuck in the throat. So what do I do to move the voice forward more?
So what you, let me mute you just so there's no feedback. What you're referring to with move the voice out of the chest and move it to the mouth is what we call oral resonance. And that is a very speech language pathology specific approach to easy, relaxed, tension-free voicing. So let me be clear that there's two different things happening here, right? Everybody who is working on their voice, whether they're trying to move it along a gender spectrum or they have a voice disorder, is going to be taught some form of how do we make sure. So this goes back to the question of tension. Oh, let me unpin Lily because this happened last time. Okay, this goes back to the question of like, can you raise your larynx without tension? We want to make sure for safe, efficient, non-harmful voicing that it doesn't feel tight and tense. The easiest way to do that is to talk about like or oral resonance. If I'm working with somebody who's trying to masculinize or feminize their voice, I'm going to teach both of them oral resonance. It's basically, sorry, I have to stop looking at the chat. Oral resonance is a way to offload the vocal cords and the tension on them so that they can move freely, do more, work more effectively and effortlessly, right? So the oral resonance that you were taught is for easy, effortless voicing. When we talk about gender resonance, there's a little bit of a difference there, right? Or else everybody we taught oral resonance to would then feminize their voice. Like that's not what's happening. Even people who aren't coming in for gender voice work, whenever we teach them oral resonance, because maybe they have like muscle tension dysphonia, they're not trying to modify gender, they have like a voice disorder, and we're teaching them oral resonance, those people aren't then ending up with a more feminized voice, right? So in my practice, I look at a person and I say, okay, let's do a bunch of voice stuff. And then we see like, I'm looking for, is there tension? We're checking in a bunch about it. Like, where is your voice? So Isabel, you're mentioning that it's stuck in your throat, which I mean, I assume makes like your voice would sound more like this. Like your voice is like back in your throat, a little bit back here. So if that's what's happening, moving your voice to the front of your face, to the mask of your face through kinesthetic feedback of sympathetic vibrations is going to help offload tension in your voice and make it freer to move, right? So that's one half of the coin, one side of the coin. The other side is then, okay, so what approach will help shorten your vocal tract or brighten the tone? So it's just kind of like a half of the puzzle. I'm weird with analogies right now. Or whatever you call them. It's embarrassing giving my profession. But I'm not saying that to say that like what you did wasn't correct, because anecdotally, what I have found working with some people, just doing oral resonance is enough, because often whenever you instruct somebody to think forward, direct their voice to the mask of their face, like I said earlier, things are attached. Like all of these pieces for most people have some sort of adhesion. So whenever whatever that means to you, to start feeling vibrations in the front of your face, some people raise their larynx as well, right? So if you do the whole like put your hand in your larynx and then start doing what whoever taught you how to do forward resonance, and your larynx goes up a little bit, well then they're attached, and it might be enough that if that person also taught you how to take that oral resonance, that effortless voicing technique, and turn it not just in from a but actually into voicing, like meet me Peter, meet me, or my mom makes great macaroons, like having resonance in your face when you're talking like I am now, which is a lot different than my normal voice, which is back here. If you have resonance in the mask of your face when you're speaking, and that by proxy raises your larynx enough, or raises your larynx, and that shortens your vocal tract, it can be like the step that you needed, or enough of a step to brighten and feminize your voice. That's something that is individualized though. So I'm assuming, I don't know who you worked with or what that experience was like, but if they stopped you at that point, the honest, transparent answer is that did enough for your voice, or they didn't really know how to do the other part of it, just to be honest.